The USGS letters and slogan "Science for a Changing World" appear in white in a flipping motion, then fade to black.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 2024 USGS Hydrography Community Call. I am Karen Adkins. I'm with the National Geospatial Program User Engagement Office. As we have the presentation today, we will address questions after the presentation. Please feel free to drop your questions into the chat. You can also raise your hand when we ask you to. And our presenter today is Steve Agel, who is the National Geospatial Program Hydrography Planning and Management Lead. And he's going to give us the 3D HP overview and status. So an overview and status of the 3D hydrography program, covering last year and projecting what is ahead for this fiscal year. I do ask that everyone please be sure to mute your microphone and enjoy the presentation. Steve, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Sure, thanks, Karen. So, as Karen mentioned, and I suspect many of you have seen me up here before, my name's Steve Agel. I'm the management planning lead for the hydrography program within the National Geospatial Program. Today's topic is sort of a year in review, year ahead kind of presentation. Talk about some of the things we've achieved, some of the things we haven't quite achieved yet, and some of the things we're planning to do in FY25. So this graphic you hopefully recognize from a variety of presentations and probably also from the 3D HP call for action circular available online. But this gives a rough, very high level kind of rough timeline of activities and, sort of when we plan to ramp some things down, when we plan to ramp some things up. And the main point of this slide is just that we are still in this transition phase, trying to retire some of the older products and get some of the newer operational processes in place. So talking about winding down the old products, this was a big activity for this fiscal year, for this past fiscal year, and a little bit of it does carry over into FY25. So we did publish the final stage products versions of the NHD in January 2024. All that is, that full extent is up and will remain up, I hate to say forever, but for a long time, as long as we can keep it out there. HydroAd for NHD, this is the HydroAd to run against the older products. This is a HEOL, ArcObjects based application, and we were able to extend the life of that to at least October 2025. There's some question mainly related to security patches and things like that as to whether we can push it further than that. If we can, we will, but right now that application is good for another year. The final update to the NHD web service happened in Q2 FY24. So all that data, again, static out there, but available and should remain available as long as we can keep it available. The final WBD edits have been made. This is the Utah Water Science Center primarily, and the WBD team have been working hard on that through the fiscal year. There were a lot of sort of lingering challenges in the data set that they have tidied up, and that data is all in the database at NGTalk. We're expecting publication of that late next month. And then finally, the NHD Plus HR National Release 2, with a lot of help from Al Ray, who's now gone from senior status to retired status, but still engaged. That is being reviewed. It's assembled, it's being reviewed, and we're anticipating publication as a static product probably after the first of the year. Just there's going to be a little bit to get through all the details of that database and then get all that stuff actually staged and published. But that's sort of the timeline on winding down the older products. And then, you've all seen this slide before. I don't want to read through it again, but I want to put it up as a reminder of, the quest we're on here. This is a complete remapping. This is not touching things up at the edges. This is not tweaking things here and there. This is completely resurveying all of the data based on the 3-depth elevation data, and portraying that data in, storing that data in a new way, collecting that data in a new way, storing that data in a new way, and providing that data in a new way. And so this is a fairly big shift in what we're doing in the hydrography program in the USGS. Probably the biggest shift since we went from the paper maps to the NHD 30 years ago. Some of you have seen this slide before, and this is, again, just sort of a reminder that we have kind of different stages in the production process, right? We talk a lot about acquisition and the elevation-derived hydrography and validating data, and that is, again, it's absolutely critical to what we do. But that's really gets to just the geometry. Then there's another step where we actually bring that data into the 3DHP core database. We're not super creative on our naming, but that's where we bring the data into the 3DHP core. And that's where a lot of the magic happens. That's where the attribution happens. That's where names get applied. That's where main stem IDs get applied. That's where catchments get generated. And so, that's when this goes from being just sort of not quite spaghetti, but a bunch of lines, to being a network, to being something that actually represents a little more conclusively processes on the ground. And then finally, we actually publish that currently just in the 3DHP all service, again, an instance of creative naming. But that's where we take that data and publish it out in ways that hopefully users find appealing. And that description is all abstract, certainly for my liking, and personally, I like to eat. So I like to think of it this way. Getting the elevation-derived hydrography is like buying a nice lump of tenderloin. It's great. It's important to have because you can't really progress without it. But I also don't want to eat it raw. We got to cook it, and then it'd be nice if we could serve it with a little garnish, maybe some utensils, right? So we're not dealing with raw meat here. We're actually dealing with something that's been properly prepared and properly delivered. And when we're managing this thing, we break that into 6 major activities across the workflow here. The first one, acquisition, is relatively straightforward. Validation is a new function for us, but one where we've put a lot of investment in the last couple of years. Ingest, which goes nicely with the food theme, but this is where we actually take that elevation-derived hydrography and do all that magic to make it something a little bit more palatable. To add the catchments, to add the main stem IDs, to add names. Data management is just sort of safe management of the data, making sure everything's there, making sure everything stays attached to where it's supposed to be attached. And then also where any kind of editing or changes might happen. And then finally, we move over to serving the data in terms of product delivery and the external tools. This is where the metaphor really kind of falls apart, but maybe that's kind of the knife and fork stuff. But that's where users actually get the data. I will mention you could also kind of envision this as like a little railroad, tracks across the bottom and a train going from left to right. And we are definitely laying the track as the train is moving from left to right. So we have a lot more maturity on the left side of this diagram than on the right side of the diagram, but we're hoping we're going to get there eventually. So with that, we're going to step through those 6 boxes at the bottom, the first being data acquisition. So FY24 was the first full year of the 3DHP program. We had 8 projects in 8 states, not quite $12 million in total value, plus another 5 federal projects. We did manage to get all of the projects except for one out, and that one had some paperwork challenges. But I want to really commend our contract partnerships team for getting that stuff out. We had a very late federal budget. The money didn't become available until well and really into the summer. And they managed to turn around all those projects and get them out the door. The other major activity, the other big activity that we've had this year, and this is Ryan Teeter, Sylvia Terziati, and Christiane Archuleta have led this, is consolidating our specifications. Some of you that have been tracking our specifications over the last several years will remember we had the specifications and read rules as sort of two watershed documents, two major new documents describing what should be expected in hydrography data. And then, then the world out there is a little more complex sometimes. And so we had a lot of guideline documents that were generated, several dozen over the course of the last several years. So Ryan, Sylvia, and Christiane have been working for the last year to consolidate all of that into, first off, one document that you can hit Control F and find what you're looking for, but also matching up places where a guideline modified something from the original read rules, and making sure those changes are all reconciled so that they're that everything agrees, and that document is the most current piece of that, the most current representation of all three of those things: specifications, read rules, and guidelines. That document has been reviewed. Ryan and Sylvia and Christiane are working through the comments so that they'll have that out. We anticipate having that out about early December. December 1st is the target for that. In FY25, one of the big accomplishments, and it doesn't seem like a big accomplishment, but it's actually a fairly big lift, was getting the data collaboration announcement out in record time. Those of you that track 3DEP went out with the 3DEP data collaboration announcement. And it was, I think, the earliest that's ever happened, which is good for us, but even better for 3DEP because of the seasonality of their acquisitions. So far, we have received 11 project proposals in 9 states. Those have been reviewed. As of last week, they've been reviewed, but they're very much budget dependent. We have a very small acquisition budget at the moment, and so we're watching developments closely to see what we're going to be able to do in FY25. And then following up on the specifications work from FY24, one of the major directions for FY25 is to really align those consolidated EDH specifications to the 3DHP requirements. That those EDH documents were created prior to 3DHP happening, and so there are mostly things we're asking for in those specifications that we don't actually use, and so we probably there's really no point in asking for them. Again, that team's going to go back through those specifications and try to align those to the 3DHP requirements. Just try to streamline the whole workflow a little bit. A couple graphics showing where acquisitions happened. So we're actually making really good progress, or more than 50%, and maybe more than that, in Alaska, thanks in large part to our Alaska mapping program. So that's what you're seeing in that that pie chart on the right. We also have had good support from Fish and Wildlife Service. Those are primarily kind of experimental projects looking at different scenarios for collecting NWI updates and EDH updates, and sort of different ways of doing that might result in cost savings, frankly, for those acquisitions. And then on the left is the CONUS work for FY24. About a third of that is USGS funding. A lot of that came from area funds that we were done acquiring 3DEP in the Great Lakes, so we're able to apply some of the Great Lakes funding to 3DHP, for example. There's not necessarily any assurance that'll happen again, but that's how we managed to get 24 funded. Thanks in a large part to non-federal partners and Forest Service and NRCS FPAC for filling in the rest of that circle. It was a good year. We did about 3% of CONUS in acquisition last year, which is somewhat more than 3 times faster than we were updating NHD. So, this moves us from something like a 150-year update cycle for NHD down to a 30-year update cycle for 3D HP. That's still a long cycle, but hoping to continue to grow the activity. In FY25, we received 11 project proposals in 9 states. 7 are for GPSC projects, 4 for co-op agreements. You see the total value there, about $9 million, requesting about 3, so that's similar ratio. 66,000 square miles, and at this point, those are not represented on the map because they haven't been funded. And again, that ability to fund those projects really comes down to what happens with the FY25 budget. The 3D NTM budget that's being applied to this explicitly at the moment is only $500,000. We have another $500,000 proposed in the president's budget. And then sort of whatever we can find in the couch cushions around the office here to fund the rest of this. So we're watching whatever's going on in Congress fairly closely. And all of this points to this idea that we're really trying to change, the paradigm of mapping, right? We're really trying to make this hydrography data predictable. Right? We want it to be able to fit in the landscape. We want users to be able to, understand what they're getting. And to some degree, we want that because we want to know what we're getting when we go to make the products. So the specifications are important. But validation is where that really happens. And that's an area where we've made a lot of progress in the last year. We've been very fortunate to have I'm actually perhaps going to mash the name here, but Milana, who needs no last name perhaps, come over from Elevation and bring some of her expertise and experience along. And then Tanya, who's been working with us for a number of years, really streamlining the CONUS process. But the automation over the course of FY24, we've cut the time required for that by more than 50%. And so that team, the Alaska team, which actually had a number of different team leads this year, but you can read that they've reviewed 164,000 square miles of initial deliveries, but then an additional 269,000 square miles of redelivered work, right? So lightning math, there's something like 430,000 square miles of data reviewed in Alaska this year. Now, of that, only 124,000 was accepted, and so that's a ratio we'd like to improve because validation is one of our big cost areas. Similarly, in CONUS, we reviewed not quite 75,000 square miles, but only accepted 8,600. So these sort of repeat this rework cycles are difficult for us. They're difficult for contractors. Nobody really likes them very much. The good news there is we are getting better deliveries. So we had 4 deliveries in the last year that were accepted on the first review. And so this is actually arguably everybody is sort of walking up the learning curve and getting to a place where we're doing this, functionally, operationally, repeatably. In FY25, we want to try to continue to automate where we can, further reduce those cycle times. I doubt we're going to see 50% more improvement again, but if we can even shave 10 or 20% off of 50, that's a huge savings for the program. Again, continuing to reduce the rework cycles. If we can see data once, that's fabulous. If we can see it twice, that's okay. Somewhere out there at 3 or 4 times around, it gets to be kind of grating for everyone involved. And then finally, cross-training of the Alaska and CONUS teams. Data comes in at different times, depending on sort of different things. And so if we have a little bit extra staff on one team, we can shift them to CONUS, we can shift them to Alaska, make that work out. That's at this point, that's as much an artifact of those teams kind of evolving independently as it is anything, but we're going to bring those together. So once again, sort of going to, this is where the magic happens. This is where we cook the data, if you will. But this is where we take that, that USDA grade A prime elevation derived hydrography and make it into something useful, something intelligent, something meaningful. And so this is, I'll cut to that last bullet first. We made a lot of progress in FY24, but I'll be the first to admit we're not really where we wanted to be. There are a number of reasons for that, but we're working on it. Did mention develop the overall tools and workflow for the ingest process, develop the conflation processes that that apply the main stem IDs and GNIS IDs and such. Those of you that have looked at actually either NHD plus high res or catchments or the catchments in the sample area that we published in Alaska, they left something to be desired, both in terms of usability and even just kind of, does that really make sense? So we've made significant progress in how we generate the catchments and in developing processes to create the flow network derivatives. These are sort of the successors to the value-added attributes in NHD+. All these activities are moving along. They are not quite where we hoped we'd be, but we do anticipate having this up and running in January. So goals for FY25, implement ingest as an operational process. We are building up a repository, a backlog of accepted data, and we need to publish the stuff. So we want to work that backlog down. There are a few data sets at this point. We've had a couple generations of specifications or schemas. There are a couple that are older. We're working on getting those upgraded to the current schemas so that we can ingest them. We also want to start generating hydro-enforced DEMs. Those may or may not be available as a product you can poke at this year, but we do hydro-enforced DEMs are part of the product suite we're going to deliver. And then we're going to code and implement the probability of flow statistics. That's a work we're doing with our water mission area in USGS. So all of that schema, specs, the validation and ingest tools fits into something of a vision of having a regular, predictable cycle to how these things happen. And if we started this, we're more or less on schedule with FY24. Hopefully, we'll be on schedule in 25 and 26. So way back, almost a year ago, we released the version 1.4 schema and specifications, and then starting in the winter and working through the summer towards the end of the fiscal year. Again, we updated the schema and specifications to 1.5. That's that consolidated specification that I was talking about a couple slides ago. While that team was working on the consolidated specs, our developers were working on improving the validation tools to address the 1.4 specs and working on the ingest tools to deal with the 1.4 specs. So now that's all moving along. Again, about December, we're going to release the 1.5 specifications that have been in development the last year. Starting sometime soon, and we will notify contractors and data providers when that happens, we'll start requesting data in the 1.4 schema and work with those tools for a year or so. Again, once we release the 1.5 schema and specs, then that team starts working on aligning the schema and specs to 3DHP. That's the activity for FY25. The development team, meanwhile, is working on upgrading the validation ingest tools to work with schema 1.5. And then we transition again in 26 to working with 1.5 and release the 1.6 specs. Now, it depends a lot on where we are at that point, whether we continue the sort of annual cycle. But we'd like to get to again, sort of a predictable rhythm here where our developers, our validation staff, our specifications folks, the contractors, cooperatives, everybody knows sort of what that rhythm looks like going forward, so that's people can expect when changes are going to happen. Moving into data management, this is a little bit less intensive but equally necessary. There are a few minor updates that were made to the internal data model, and we were able to add some basic flow network derivatives, really just sort of upstream main, downstream main, that kind of stuff to support line addressing for Hydrograph 3D. That's a development activity. In FY25, we're going to continue to keep everything running. We want to add the calculated probability of flow metrics, and that's right now it's estimated for Q2 of FY25, so January to March. Build in some additional flow network derivatives, and then this is kind of a big one. Working on building in the editing workflows for names and NHD-based features. Just came off a call 10 minutes ago, talking about how we need to be able to edit some lakes that are represented in NHD, and we need to be able to have that. We need to have that capability. We're starting with the simpler stuff, and we'll build to being able to edit BDH-derived features eventually. In product delivery, again, we have the 3DHP all service up. It's been up for about a little over a year now. And maybe more interestingly, it's been updated regularly. Even if there aren't changes aren't major changes in the database, having that workflow established to make sure that stuff gets from the database out to the public service, that workflow is in place. We're planning a static release of the 3DHP data, probably in December. Continue quarterly service updates. So this will be, as data is ingested in the database, every quarter we'll post a new version of the service. And then every year, probably this time of year, we'll publish a static version of it. We are planning to work on a cartographic view. And so, right now we have one that really supports addressing, but is maybe not great for cartography. We're working with our cartographic data services group to work towards a cartographic view of the data, something that's a little bit more map friendly. And then we'll work with 3DEP to work on ways to publish hydro-enforced DEMs, and again, update and maintain product specifications so that as a consumer, as a user, what you're getting when you go and hit the service, when you download the data. So the data behaves predictably. All right. And then external user tools. Talked a little bit about getting HydroAd for NHD, another year of life. We are working in HydroAd 3D. This development is all taking a little longer than we hoped it would. But we are looking at we have the logic in place. One of the real issues with HydroAd for NHD was the rate, the particularly rate of publication of points. The good news here is that the team has focused very hard on making this faster, and currently I'm seeing about 100%, about 100 times faster rate. So if you could do, I think this is the right order of magnitude, if you do 5,000 in an hour through the AGOL service, you can do 500,000 an hour in the new architecture, which for those folks out there that have millions and millions of points addressed to the NHD or NHD plus, makes that something like something less than a lifetime pursuit to translate those. That said, we sort of hit up against a security problem with GeoServer related to as the basis of this. We're anticipating a resolution of that in Q2 of FY25, and that will be initially available as basic point addressing, so publishing points. We'll have a batch QC workflow to go through and do go same things you did in Hydrad for NHD, probably later this year. And then we'll move to lines and batch lines. Hopefully we'll get there. We may or may not get all the way through the lines and batch lines this fiscal year. And then the last piece is to develop an external interface for markups and suggestions. The previous slide, 2 slides ago, I guess we showed building editing workflows for names and NHD-based features. This is where we build a interface for the public to suggest edits to NHD-based features and places where BGN approved names are not properly applied to the hydrography. We're not taking new name suggestions through this interface, but there are tens of thousands of features out there that should have names and don't, and there's some smaller number that have the wrong names on them. We want to try to get that stuff resolved. So, overall goals and priorities for FY25. Number 1 is publish data, right? We have a growing pile of accepted elevation-derived hydrography. It's, a little bit like a pile of raw meat right in there. It's great, but it's not getting any better. We need to get that data out the door. Want to continue to accelerate the EDH data validation. There was a table there I showed, but I guess didn't talk to actually, showing the rates of acquisition for the U.S. and Alaska. Alaska has been at kind of a steady state around 75 or 80,000 square miles a year for the last several years. But for CONUS, we want to ramp this up to about 300,000 square miles a year. Obviously, it's going to take more money, but we're also going to have to be able to validate a whole lot more data. And so we want to continue to make that process as efficient as possible. Continue to acquire new EDH data. We want to replace the whole country, ideally in 9 years as a target. We're going to need to acquire a lot more data. Building the HydroRad 3D capabilities. So, getting points, batch points, lines, and batch lines, getting those all up and running, ideally before HydroRad for HD expires. And then kind of conceptually, and this is something we didn't do particularly well in NHD, but try to work in regular cycles, have releases at regular cadences, have things happen in predictable timeframes, just as a matter of building a little bit of stability into what we do and what you do as consumers of the data. And finally, incorporate the probability of flow estimates and start to build markup and editing capabilities. We're starting with names and NHD-based features. Those are maybe not simple, but relatively simpler than working with the 3D EDH features with, they don't have catchments once they're in the database. So we won't have quite as much to fix if we make changes to the NHD data. So we're starting there.
Thank you, Steve. Excellent presentation, very helpful. Yeah, great work for everyone involved. And so just to let the audience know, we will not have a hydrography community call in November. Typically, we combine November and December. We're going to do that again. We will have our next hydrography community call on December 10th. And we're looking into a couple of subjects, so I will send in an announcement to the community as soon as we have a selected topic. And thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate your attention today and joining us for Steve's presentation. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in about a month and a half. Take care, everyone.
The USGS letters and slogan signs for a changing world appear in white in a flipping motion, then fade to black.